Okay, so let's welcome Pastor Col Krueger, who's going to be sharing an exhortation from the Word of God with us this afternoon. Amen. Thank you, Col.
Thank you, Janet. It's not so much to have the last word, but what was coming to me this morning when we were praying for our Prime Minister, and I don't rush into things. It takes me about 2 weeks to prepare a 5-minute email, and so I'm still working on that. And just to encourage our Prime Minister, and I felt Jesus was saying to me, blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and say all manner of things against you falsely for my sake. And so I got that message to get to Scott Morrison. But I want to encourage you, if you haven't already emailed him, just force yourself to do it.
Amen.
And to encourage him. He will be some weeks before he ever gets to read your email, but his hangers-on will be reading it straight away and telling him. So you're speaking into them. However, that's not what I'm up here this afternoon to talk about. I'm pretty sure none of you have ever had this experience of having to change your mind about something. Huh? And I tell you, the more ancient you get, the harder it is. The things I have known absolutely all of my life have been getting tipped over. And one of the things that came, and I don't know when now, it's been some years in the coming, it was to discover that Jesus preached a gospel of the kingdom, not a gospel of salvation, which is the one I'd grown up on. It's all I'd heard, it's all I'd known. And it's one thing to be able to just change the words, but it goes far deeper than that. Yep. It goes to the way you think. Yep. And the thoughts that you're expressing in ordinary conversation. Yep. And in your mannerisms, there's a whole host of things. And so in getting there, and I get a bit long-winded, and I'm a person, I like to get things in a nutshell. But I'm having a bit of trouble getting the right size shell lately. But I like to condense things and to get it down to where even I can understand it. And we just need no word study, but just to remind you of this word kingdom, the gospel that Jesus preached. There are two sides to the word in the English language, two sides in the Greek language also. In the concrete understanding of that word is the domain of the monarch. That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, in the abstract understanding, it is the rule of that monarch. And that monarch's right to exercise the rule. That is the authority that in our case, even still in Australia, although people are wanting to do away with it, the Queen still is our monarch. She has the authority to rule. We are presuming that by birth her son, Charles, will inherit that right. It's the way things are done in kingdom. And so in coming to grips with this, how do I then preach a gospel of the kingdom? Got to change things a lot from what we have been preaching, what we have been hearing, what our understanding has been. And it's quite a radical change. And I was amazed. I think I've read the Bible cover to cover something like 24, 25 times now. And you know how I think most people here are doing that. And you've read it again and again and again. And then next time you read something you hadn't read before. That's right. It just continues to happen. And so I found this verse when I started thinking in terms of the kingdom, and it's Genesis 1:26, where God states his purpose in creating the human being. And it says, just the first part of this verse, then God said, let's make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them reign, have dominion over all the other living creatures. Now, the have dominion has two sides to it. On the one hand, it is stating where this human is going to exercise that rule. On the other hand, it is the rule itself. And it's not cutting these humans loose to do their own thing. It is, I believe, the rule of God and how it will be exercised in the creation. I hadn't been considering this before. I had, for quite a while, recognised we have the responsibility for putting Jesus' enemies under his feet. Accepted that, was teaching that. What I hadn't recognised was that that was the purpose I was born for. Hallelujah. I was created for. Yeah. Wow. And I am part of that man. And again, language changes, but we won't go down that track. That man, according to another learned teacher who knows a bit, it was spelt with a double N, M-A-N-N, and it meant male and female. And so that is there, right there in the first chapter of Genesis. It also mentions that they were made male and female. But it is that one creation. The gender sense of man has just emerged in recent years. Let's leave that one alone. Now, what I want to say is this. I am being not irreverent when I say because the human has been created to exercise the rule of God in the earth. God needs our permission to act in the earth. That authority given is absolute. And we could, if we had another day or two, just explore Jesus even, honouring that. God in the flesh, honouring what he has created. Leave that one aside for now. And so when God needs to do something, and he's doing this all the time, he needs to quicken in us that desire for what he is desiring. And if you like, to authorise him to do it. That is why Jesus talks so much about asking in prayer. It wasn't the great things that you could dream up he's talking about. It's the authorising God to come and do it in you. Maybe in a circle around you, but you are the one that has the authority to allow him or to deny him. Serious stuff. And you see, this authority is delegated authority. It is not ours, given to us to exercise as we choose. It is given to exercise God's rule, God's authority, and that is what we are moving in. And we see in Genesis, if we kept going there, we won't have the time to do it, but if you're making notes, you might have a look at Genesis 3, 1-6. It gives us the picture then of that man forfeiting that authority to another. The authority that is invested in the human creation has been handed over to someone else. He described as the serpent. And then we find in Genesis 3:15, this is right at the start of the Word of God, is recorded in the Bible. Right at the start, he's setting the scene. And in Genesis 3:15, we see God speaking to that serpent and telling him what's going to happen. I put to you that essentially what God is saying to that serpent is that he is going to restore to that human what has been given over to the serpent, to Satan. We're going in big strides and big jumps. I hope you can just grasp some of it as we go. We jump quickly now into the New Testament, and we might have a look at just a couple of the scriptures there just to prove the point, because Jesus is recognizing John 12 and verse 31. God manifesting as a man is not challenging Satan. No, that's not right. Yes, Satan's position as ruler of this world. On a number of occasions, but in John 12 and 31, Jesus calls him the ruler of this world. He mentions it again in John 16 and verse 11, calls him the ruler of this world. He wasn't created for that position. He got it by deception. It was handed to him by those who had that position. And so Jesus is coming to restore that right, that authority, that rule in the creation. And it happened through God himself dying. And at the cross and in the cross, defeating him who had usurped that right to rule. We meet this, or Hebrews 2. Actually, the whole chapter of Hebrews 2 is about this event, but summarised perhaps in verse 14 and 15. You see, God himself likewise became a human, or took the human form. God didn't become a human. God took the human form in order to die, to destroy him who had the power of death. And so in the cross, Jesus took back that power. I like to think, and this be right or wrong, that as even while Jesus' body was still hanging on the cross, he has gone into hell to have his victory parade. And there he proclaims his victory over all of Satan and his army. He led them as prisoners, displaying his victory to them. For what it's worth, when you're confronting one of these evil beings, remind them that they've lost their power. Jesus has died. You've lost that right to test me. But that's a by the way. And so Paul records that for us in Colossians 2 and verses 13 to 15. You see, having wiped out all the handwriting of the accusation that was against the humans, he then led all these demons in that public spectacle.
Hallelujah.
Just to announce to them, made sure that they understand now what has happened. And then, at the end of Matthew's Gospel, Matthew 28 and verse 18, he is able now to say, all authority has been given to me. And I used to think that that was God conferred. But it couldn't be, because this is God. How can God be given to God the authority? I'm believing nowadays that this was Satan yielding up to Jesus, acknowledging that Jesus has the authority, that Jesus has taken the authority off him. At the end of that victory parade, Satan was left in no doubt. And so Jesus can come and announce to his disciples, all authority is mine. I have restored it. I am restoring it. And just to remind us again that all authority, this is apart from God's authority, it is God's authority, he is the only authority, that all authority is delegated from him. You'll remember when Jesus was facing the Roman authorities at the time of his execution, and the man who held the absolute power in Palestine at that time was skiting about his authority to let him go or to execute him. And Jesus just very kindly and very patiently pointed out to Pilate, you haven't got authority. All authority, you see. Jesus knew where the authority was. I like to think that Pilate found that out for himself and proved it. But that's speculation. But what I want to encourage you with is this fact of Jesus stating that this authority is delegated, that this is the very authority in which you and I, born again believers in Jesus Christ, exercise. There is no limit. This is God's authority. This was why the human race was created. That authority was handed over to another, but that has been changed. And I also happen to believe and teach that this Jesus is simply, we talk about the redemption bit and we hang around that an awful lot. And that is part of it. But I believe that the greatest work, and to recognise this, is the restoration of the human race to their position, to their created place. And we could go on speculating about even the prayer session this morning, as we see us taking back that authority. That's it for me.